Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we get together in the middle of the week to learn more about technology. We're so glad that you are here with us. And today's presentation, I think, is one of the most unique things that people don't know about. And as you read in the summary from our Mark Schulman, is something that most people want or need. We've always talked in the years past that everybody should have a virtual copy of whatever operating system they're running so that they can test out something before they do it on the real thing. And so we've asked Mark to come and tell us everything and all about all the benefits, what virtualization is, and why we would want to use it. So, Mark, I'm going to turn things over to you. Mark's another one of our Florida East Coasters, and he's done a number of presentations for us on our Speakers Bureau. So, Mark, over to you.
Thanks, John. Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, this is a fun topic, I think. And it's one of the things I'll give you a lot of uses for it. And it's one of the things that people just don't know about and don't think to use. So, uh, all right. Hopefully you can see my slides here.
Yes, Ken.
And let's talk about it. And just as a preliminary item, my name again is Mark Schulman. I've been an IT professional for about 45 years now. And we're going to look at several free pieces of software. And I want to make it clear that I don't have any affiliation with any of these products. These are just things that I like and I use. And hopefully, after you've seen them, you'll think, wow, that's useful. So, what we're going to talk about today will explain all the aspects of what's called virtualization. Seems like an impossibly technical term, but by the time we're done, I hope you'll be able to say, wow, that's easy and I can use that. So, we'll talk about what exactly virtualization is, we'll demonstrate how we can use it, and I will walk you through setting up a virtual machine and give you some good reasons to use it. So, what is virtualization? Well, we're going to create what we call a virtual computer. And what happens is your computer simulates one or more entirely different machines. So it's as if you have a computer running inside your computer, that computer within the computer. And what's interesting about this computer inside the computer, and I'll give you some technical terms for it here in just a second. But the virtual computer has its own operating system, its own processor, its own hard drive, its own memory, its own applications, and they don't have to be the same operating system that you're normally running on your machine. So as we'll see, for example, if you're on a Mac and you'd like to be able to run Windows, a virtual machine is a great way to do that. If you're on Windows and you'd like to give Linux a spin and try it out, a virtual machine is a great way to do that. So I'm going to show you how to do all of those things. And what's interesting is when I first started messing with virtualization, probably about 25 years ago, it was all done in software and it tended to be kind of slow. But what's happened recently, and by recently I mean last 10 or 15 years, is that the people who make the processors have actually put support for it in the processors. So now a lot of things that had to be done in software to make this all work are now actually built into the processors that come in our PCs. So it's a lot faster and more seamless than it used to be. So, one of the things I really want you to understand, and people kind of have a hard time wrapping their heads around this, is your computer is not pretending to be running another operating system, or it's not pretending to have another computer running inside of it. It genuinely, truly is running another operating system. So, when we use this, for example, your computer, your one computer, can be simultaneously running Windows 10 and Windows 11. It can be simultaneously running Windows and Linux. A Mac could be simultaneously running Windows and Linux and even simulating a Chromebook or something like that. So it really is truly running multiple operating systems at the same time. And it might just be, as John alluded to, maybe you're running Windows 11, that's your regular operating system, and you just want to create a virtual machine that is also running Windows 11. And I'll give you some good reasons why you might want to do that in just a minute. So let's put some terminology to this. So your real computer, when we're talking about virtual machines, is known as the host. And then the virtual machines that you create using a program that I'm going to show you here in a minute are referred to as the guests. You'll also just hear them referred to as a virtual machine. So host and guest. So for example, on this machine here, I'm running Windows 10. I've been a little slow to put Windows 11 on it. So my host is running Windows 10, but I could create a virtual machine running Windows XP or running Windows 11 or running Linux, and those machines are all the guest machines. And I can create as many of those as I want. And theoretically, and I'll tell you why say theoretically, you can have several running at the same time. So you could actually have Linux running in one window and Chromebook running in another window, and you can cut and paste between them all, and it's really cool. So let's talk about the virtual machine, or what we call the guest machine. The software inside the virtual machine has no knowledge of the real PC. So it's going to have its own environment, its own operating system, its own hard drive, its own memory, its own applications, everything. And it thinks that's all there is. So it doesn't know anything about the larger machine, your real computer. It thinks the virtual machine is all there is. And that fact is really useful, and I'll show you some reasons why in just a second. So the operating system and the apps think they are running inside a real PC, and they don't understand that they're just a virtual machine running inside a real computer. So this is and the what this always makes me think of when I think about this is The Matrix. Anybody see that movie, The Matrix, where all the people in it think they're in the real world when in fact they're just a computer simulation inside a much larger real world? Well, that's kind of what's going on here. So the virtual machine is just blissfully aware of reality. So it's got its own little world that it's acting in, and it really doesn't understand that it's just a piece of a much larger machine. And I want to show you this in action, and then we'll talk about why you would want to do this. And there are many reasons. So I use a piece of software, and we'll talk about a couple of others, but I use a piece of software that's owned by Oracle Corporation, and it's called Oracle VirtualBox. And this is what the main user interface looks like. So again, as I mentioned, this machine is running Windows
We're
10.
we're not seeing that, Mark. All we see is a blue screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am I'm on the wrong. Okay, there we go. I've got two monitors and I've got the wrong one
But
shared.
I really like the color.
Yeah, well, thank you. I kind of like it too.
We're good now.
Okay, so this is what the user interface looks like. And I've got 5 different virtual machines that I've created here, and I'm going to run one of them. I'm going to run this one right here. So I select it and I click the start icon, and it's probably going to open on the wrong window, so I may have to move it over. Let's see. Uh, and give it a second to start up. Yeah, it did start on the wrong one. There's what it looks like. How about what we've got going on here? Anybody remember this? So I created a virtual machine that has Windows XP, and it really is Windows XP. I set this up from a hard drive that I had, and it really is Windows XP. If I click the start menu, there's the old Windows XP start menu. And let's see, I can't see very well. Um, Yep. So there's Explorer from Windows XP, and so it really is Windows XP. And if I had software that runs under Windows XP, I can put it on this virtual machine and it will run. And to shut it down, you remember how to shut down Windows XP? I click Start and here, and I tell it I want to shut down, and that terminates the virtual machine. Okay, and here's one that's even more fun after that's done shutting down. Oh, come on. Why are you taking so long? There we go. All right, get a load of this one. And it takes a minute to get started up because it's actually booting an operating system. Yeah, wrong window. Okay, look what it says there. It says starting MS-DOS. Probably haven't seen that one in a while. And now I'm going to type WIN and hit enter. Any of you remember this? This is Microsoft 3 dot, or Windows 3.1. And I can open up an MS-DOS prompt. Maybe. Well, that didn't work. I don't know why. I can run File Manager. It doesn't like running on my second monitor. I don't know why. Okay, not important. I don't want to spend too much time on this. This was just a novelty, but this really is running MS-DOS and then running Windows 3.1 on top of it. And I can get out of it by, all right, my mouse is doing weird things. All right, I don't know why that's not working. It was, but that's a nice thing about a virtual machine. If you don't like what it's doing, you can just kill it. And the last thing I want to show you is this one right here. And I'm sure it's going to open in the wrong window or the wrong monitor, I should say. This is going to take just a second to boot up. And this is Linux Mint, which is my favorite distribution of Linux. And we're going to see it again in just a second. And it wants me to log in. Okay, and this is what Linux looks like. I can open Firefox down here and bring up a browser. I can open File Manager, maybe. There we go. Um, and I've got their equivalent of the Start menu. And this is Linux. We'll talk more about that in just a second. It's got a shutdown button, so I'm going to click that now and click shutdown. So again, the thing I want you to understand is it's not pretending to be running Linux or it's not pretending to be running Windows XP. It really, really is. Okay, so that's cool, but why would we want to do this? Well, I'm going to give you a bunch of reasons that you might want to use it, and then I'll give you another reason why corporations use it a lot, which probably won't apply to anybody in here, but kind of interesting to know. So, reason one is to explore a new operating system. Maybe you've heard about Linux, or maybe you've heard about a Chromebook, and you're not interested enough, at least not at this point, to switch to Linux or to actually go out and buy a Chromebook, but you'd like to see what they look like. And so, a virtual machine allows you to do that. So, a minute ago, you saw me boot up Linux into a full screen window. And now I could go watch some YouTube videos and learn a little bit about Linux and get to play with it. And who knows, I might decide that I want it to be my primary operating system. So just being able to explore and learn without messing with your current machine is really a great thing to be able to do. So obviously you'd want to have a pretty good understanding of Linux before you decided to completely dump Windows. So this gives you a way to get to play with something. Reason two, run a specific application. There are programs that only run on one operating system or maybe two. So, for example, Adobe Creative Cloud is not available on Linux. So, if you're using Linux, you could use the same software we've got here. It is available for Linux. And you could create a virtual machine that runs Windows just to be able to use Adobe Creative Cloud. Microsoft Office also is not available on Linux. Visual Studio is not available on anything outside of Windows. So maybe you're a Mac user and you'd like to be able to use Visual Studio, or maybe you have to use Visual Studio as part of your job, but you like your Mac, you don't want to give that up. So you can just run a virtual machine that runs Windows on your computer, and Visual Studio will work just fine. So that's something that I've done before. This is probably the most common thing I use it for. I want a new kind of software, and I want to check out lots and lots of different types of software. I'm sorry, let me get this together. I want to try out lots of different applications that all claim to do what I want them to do, and then I want to pick one and install it on my computer. And we've all seen that if you install a Windows program and then later uninstall it, it frequently leaves a lot of debris behind. It leaves registry entries, it leaves files behind. And the nice thing about a virtual machine is you can go install, for example, if you wanted to pick an Office suite. So that's LibreOffice is the logo on the left. In the center is OpenOffice, and that's Microsoft Word on the right, part of Microsoft Office. So what I could do is I could fire up my virtual machine. I could install all three of those applications, and actually LibreOffice comes pre-installed on most versions of Linux. So I can try all three applications, play with them, see which one I like, and maybe I decide, okay, I like LibreOffice, or maybe I decide, no, I got to have Microsoft Office, and then I can go install that on my regular machine. And that's really useful if these are paid programs. So, for example, with Office, there's no free version of Office generally. So, I really want to be able to compare that to the other two before I decide to spend the money. And when you're all done, you just install on your real computer the one application that you've decided you want to keep. So a virtual machine is a great place to try out new software. You can install dozens of different programs and then buy the one you want to keep. Number four, try risky things. So just like Las Vegas, what happens in a virtual machine stays in the virtual machine. And this is why it was so important, the point I made before, that a virtual machine is not even aware that there is a larger machine. So, for example, if you are running in a virtual machine and you install an application that has malware in it, the worst it can do is gum up that virtual machine. And if that happens, you can delete the virtual machine and create a new one. So, what anything that might cause harm to your computer. If there were malware that went through and started deleting or encrypting files, well, okay, that happens in the virtual machine, but it's not going to affect your regular machine. So it's a safe place to try unsafe things. And another example would be, for example, there's this big directory in Windows and you don't know if it's safe to delete it. Well, you can fire up your Windows virtual machine, you can delete that directory or that folder, see if everything still works. And if it does, then you can go delete it in your main machine as well, your host machine. And there's the important point on that last point. The virtual machine cannot get to the host machine. So anything that an application tries to do in a virtual machine cannot reach outside of that virtual machine. And I'll show you one exception to that, but it's under your control. So I'll give you lots of caveats. So it's a safe place to try things that are inherently unsafe. Another good one is you've got an old application and you've just updated to Windows 27, and you want to see if that application you got when you were running Windows 95 will still run on the new operating system. So you can have a virtual machine. For example, if you're running Windows 11, you could have a virtual machine that has Windows 10 on it. And or actually, you'd want to do this the other way around. You're running Windows 10, you could create a version that's running Windows 11, a virtual machine that's running Windows 11, and then you could install some really important software that you really love and see if it runs okay on Windows 11. And if it doesn't, then you might not want to upgrade Windows 10 to Windows 11 until you absolutely have to. So I've done this before at work where we had to upgrade our computers to Windows 11. We've got some mission critical apps that we just cannot do without. And so I had a chance using a virtual machine to make sure that our apps would run in Windows 11. And they did. Reason number 6, I love this one. Mess with scam callers. So this is so much fun. This is one of the great things about being semi-retired is I get to do things like this that are horrible time wasters. So a scammer calls, and I know he's a scammer, and he says he's calling me from the bank and they withdrew $1,000 that they shouldn't have. And if I'll just let him log on to my bank account on my PC, then he can fix all of this. And so can he do that? And, I know better than to let him, but it would be fun to mess with him and waste his time. So what I can do normally, if it weren't for virtual machines, as soon as he says, okay, let me connect to your computer, I would have to say, no, you're an idiot, go away, I'm not dealing with you. But if I have a virtual machine, I can start up the virtual machine and I can let him play with that. And so he thinks he's on my PC and he can go ahead and download malware. He can do anything he wants and it's not going to affect my computer. And I can just string him along and waste 45 minutes or an hour of his time before I finally say, nope, I've had enough fun playing with you. And he may have messed up one of the virtual machines, but again, I can just delete it and create another one. So this can be a lot of fun. Reason number 7 probably doesn't apply to anybody in here, but I'll mention it. Virtualization enables a large company to bring online hundreds of servers with just a few machines. So this happens a lot that a very large company, let's say they needed to be able to run 100 different web servers to support their website. Well, that's a lot of machines. So what a company would actually do in a situation like that is they might buy, let's say, 5 really powerful machines and have each of those machines run 20 virtual machines, and each one of those virtual machines thinks it's a server. And that turns out to be really cost effective, and the performance they get out of it is usually perfectly acceptable. And the really large company I used to work for about 15 years ago, this is exactly what we did. We had hundreds and hundreds of virtual machines that were running servers. And so this is really, really common, but not going to apply to most people in here. All right. So how do we do this? So maybe I've convinced you that one of those reasons is a good reason. How are we going to set this up? Well, these days, we've got two players in this space. Either one of them is fine. We've got Oracle VirtualBox and we've got VMware Player. And either one of those will do everything I'm going to show you in here. So VirtualBox is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. VMware is only available for Windows or Linux. So if you're a Mac user, you've got to use VirtualBox here. But the virtual machines that you create, the guest operating system, can be anything. So you can be running a virtual box under Windows, and you can create virtual machines that run Linux, Chromebook, Android, um, even Mac OS if you're willing to put a little bit of effort into it. So anyway, those are the two pieces we're going to use. For VirtualBox, the base package is free for any use, including commercial use. We actually use this one at work because we can legally install it for free and create virtual machines at work. VMware VMware Player is free for personal use. In a business setting, you have to buy a license for it. My favorite is VirtualBox. It's the one I've been using for a decade now, and I really love it. I don't have anything bad to say about VMware, but I'm really, really familiar with VirtualBox, so that's the one I'm going to demonstrate for you. Okay, so to set up a virtual machine, what do you need? Well, the first thing you need is virtualization software, and we just saw the two big players. So it's either going to be Oracle VirtualBox or VMware Player, and I'll tell you in a minute where you get those. You also need a copy of the operating system that you want to run in there. So if you're going to set up a virtual machine running Windows, you need a copy of Windows. If you're going to run Mac OS, you need a copy of that. If you're going to run Linux, you need a copy of that. And typically what you need is called an ISO file. Some people pronounce it ISO file. I spell it out, an ISO file. And all of these operating systems are available as an ISO file. In fact, if you go download a copy of Linux, that's always what you're going to get is an ISO file. Same if you go out to Microsoft's website. Microsoft gives you a couple other options, but an ISO file is always one of the options. And then you need some resources. We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but it's going to use some of the memory in your computer and it's going to use some of the disk space on your computer. So you can't create virtual machines if you've got a machine that's tight on memory or really tight on disk space. And we'll talk more about that in a second. But you've got to have some spare memory in your computer and you got to have some disk space. So let's talk about resources here. So anytime you set up a virtual machine, it's going to need its own disk space. So what you actually do, you'll see me do it in just a second. You're going to tell your computer to take a chunk of your disk, of your hard disk or your SSD, whatever it is, and set it aside for the use of this virtual machine. And typically it's somewhere between 10 to 25 gigabytes. So most computers today can spare that kind of disk space. And that space is going to be permanently set aside for this virtual machine for as long as you have this virtual machine. Now you can delete it at any time and free that disk space up. But as long as you have this virtual machine, it's going to have to occupy that disk space. And here's the one that can cause people some issues. It also needs its own memory when it's running. So this machine I'm running on right now has 16 gigabytes. Well, if I run a virtual machine that needs 4 gigabytes of memory, my main Windows computer is now down to 12 gigabytes for as long as that virtual machine is running. If I ran another virtual machine that uses 8 gigabytes, now the two virtual machines are using 12 gigabytes, and my main Windows machine is down to 4 gigabytes, and it's probably going to choke on it. Windows really does not like running in that little bit of memory. So if you're going to use virtual machines, you need to have a little bit more memory than Windows typically needs. And this is the important one. Because it looks and feels like it is a completely self-contained computer, anything you run in that virtual machine has to have its own product keys. So let's say, for example, that you wanted to create a virtual machine that's running Windows, some version of Windows, and you want to install Microsoft Office in it. You're going to need an activation key for Microsoft Office to run it in that virtual machine. So even though your main machine may have a copy of Office that you activated with a product key, in the virtual machine, again, it thinks it's its own computer. You want to run Office in this thing? You need a product key. So that can be a little bit problematic. You can always use the online version of Office, and that won't cost you anything. So the first thing we would do is go to virtualbox.org and download the software for VirtualBox. I've already done that and I've already installed it. There's no particular trick to installing it. It just looks like any other software installation thing. So I'm not going to walk you through the installation of the software. You've seen this routine 100 different times. So you also need a copy of the ISO for the operating system. And let me show you what that looks like. Now, I've already downloaded it. They tend to kind of be big downloads, so I didn't want to make you sit through that. But let me show you what that looks like. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go to, I'm just going to type download virtual box. Oh, it's not us. I'm sorry. That's not what I want. I want to download Linux Mint. Okay, and it's this link right here. And if I scroll down, yeah, okay, I want this first one. I want the cinnamon edition. Any of them will work, but I like this one. So I'm going to click download, and it gives me a whole bunch of links where I can download it. And I can go to the first one. I can download it from Clarkson University. I click on that, and here's the file it's going to download. And perhaps you can see, I don't know if you can read it, but it ends in .iso, which is exactly what I want. And I downloaded it earlier, and there it is right there. Okay, so we've got that. And the example we're going to use, I want to create a virtual machine. I'm using VirtualBox. I want my operating system to be Linux Mint, a popular version of Linux. I want it to have 4 GB of memory, and I want it to have a 25 GB hard drive. So let's see if we can do that. So I'm going to open VirtualBox and I'm going to go to Machine. And by the way, you don't have to write this down. I've got a step-by-step guide I'm going to give you. So you go to Machine and New, and I get this dialog. Now there's a lot of questions and there are a lot of options you can change. I'm going to show you the ones that you actually get to use. So it wants a name for the machine. You can call it anything you want, but I'm going to call it Linux Mint for Wednesday workshop. It asks where you want to put it. I'm going to leave that just as it is. It wants me to give it the ISO that we downloaded for Linux Mint. And I've got it right here. If I didn't, I could browse for it. Just click Other, and then I can click right there, and it's got it. There's a checkbox down here that says proceed with unattended installation. Don't do that. So I'm going to uncheck that box. And then there's some options in these last two things that I need to go to. So I'm going to open this second one, and that's where I can tell it how much memory I want this virtual machine to have. And it's defaulting to 2 GB. I'm going to make it 4. And there we go, 4 GB. And you can give it multiple CPUs if you have them. I do. I've got 12 CPUs. No, I don't. I've got 8, 6. So I can give it multiple CPUs if I want. I don't want. Then I open up this second one and it says, how big do you want the hard drive to be? And I'm going to say 25 GB. And we're going to say finish. and it has created it. So I'm going to click Start. Now, what I'm going to find is I'm not going to have an installed version of Linux Mint waiting for me. What I'm going to have is it's going to run the program to install Linux Mint. So I still have to go through an installation process, just like I would with Linux or Windows or even Mac OS. And it actually takes a while. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I'm going to let you see that it is actually doing some stuff. And we'll wait a second. Okay, and there it goes. And it's starting the process. And this is just gobbledygook to us mere mortals, but it's printing out a list of everything it's installing and everything it's doing. And give it a sec. And sorry for the delay, but it's worth seeing it finish. So let me explain what's going to happen. When you run the Linux and almost any Linux installer, what it does is it doesn't install it on your hard drive. It runs it in the virtual machine in this case, and then gives you a link to actually install it. So what I can do, I've got a full version of Linux here running, but it hasn't actually installed anything here. So I can open File Explorer, I can go play with it all I want, but if I actually want to install it, I just double click this icon right here and it'll step me through the whole installation process. What's really cool about this is you don't even have to go through all the motions of setting up the virtual machine before you play with it a little bit and see if you like it. But I'm just going to shut it down. So, yeah, got it. So you can see all I had to do was answer some questions there, and the rest of it was pretty easy. And if I had just double clicked that icon, it would have walked me through the process, which takes about 20 minutes of installing it in the virtual machine. And you saw me run a virtual machine with Linux in it a minute ago. All right. So I told you you didn't have to write all this down. The next 6 slides are a step-by-step demonstration of exactly everything I just did. So you're going to get a copy of these slides, and everything you need is in those 6 slides that I just skipped. That's what I did with the demo. So you can look at those 6 slides and you can walk through it yourself. VirtualBox has a little add-on called Guest Editions. And you remember I said that when an operating system is running in a virtual machine, it doesn't even know the outside machine exists. What Guest Editions does is it actually gives it a little bit of a knowledge that it's actually a virtual machine running on a larger computer. And to install VirtualBox, I'm sorry, to install guest editions, all you do is click on the devices menu and then click on insert guest edition CD image. It's not a CD, it's an image of a CD, and an icon will appear on your desktop to install it. So one of the things this allows you to do, I use it on every virtual machine that I create. The big thing it allows you to do is create shared folders so that actually, I think I've got it. Yep, I got a slide on this. So here are the big things it does. One of the things is auto resizing. So you can run the virtual machine full screen, you can run it as just a window, and it will adjust itself as you resize it to adjust itself to the size of the window. It gives you shared clipboards. This is really useful. So if you're running an application inside the virtual machine, you can select some text, press Control C to copy it, and then you can go to your regular machine, open Notepad and paste it into Notepad, or open any application and just paste it right in. And it works the other way too. So your virtual machine and your real machine share a clipboard. You can drag and drop files from one to the other, which is really useful. and mouse pointer integration. And what that means is if you just move your mouse so that it's over the virtual machine, then the virtual machine sees it as, oh, there's a mouse, and it understands that that's its mouse. And as you move the mouse outside the virtual machine, then your main machine takes over and says, oh, okay, that's my mouse again. And if you don't have that, it's pretty clear that it's not quite as usable. So guest editions is something I install on every virtual machine. VirtualBox also has something called an extension pack, and it's an application that you can install on your computer. And the big thing it does is it enables USB 3 support. Now, the slide actually says USB support. That's not quite true. Out of the box, VirtualBox supports USB 2. What this allows it to do is to support USB 3. So what that enables you to do is to plug a flash drive into your computer and your virtual machine would be able to access that flash drive. The interesting thing about the extensions pack is it's free for personal use and for educational use. It is not free for commercial use. So that's the only part of VirtualBox that's not free for any use. A couple other notes, few other notes. We talked a little bit, guest editions enables you to use shared folders. That's really useful. It enables the virtual machine to access files in folders you specify. So you can create a shared folder, and if you want to copy some documents over to your virtual machine, you can copy them into that folder. And then when you run your virtual machine, you'll see those files in the shared folder, and you can do whatever you want to with them. Now, the thing you have to be a little bit careful about is you remember we said what happens in the virtual machine stays in the virtual machine, but the virtual machine can get to these shared folders. So you don't want to use shared folders to store your only copy of critical files because the whole idea is that if I'm trying out a program that I'm a little suspicious of in my virtual machine and it turns out it's got malware in it, it can access the stuff in the shared folder and it could encrypt it or delete it or whatever. So you only want to use the shared folders as a temporary place to transfer files back and forth between your regular computer and your virtual machine. And you can set the shared folders to be either read write or read only. So actually, you could create a shared folder that's read only. So you could, on your regular machine, copy files into it. And then on your virtual machine, you can copy files out of it into the virtual machine, but you can't change anything in the shared folder from within the virtual machine. So there's a possible workaround for that. So shared folders are really useful. Just be sure if you think you might be doing things, dangerous things in the virtual machine, you don't want to put important stuff in there. There's one trick to setting up shared folders on Linux, and here's a complete explanation of what exactly you have to do. I'm not going to go through this. If you wind up setting up a virtual machine that has Linux in it, here's what you need to do. You can come refer to it whenever you want. A few more thoughts. When you create a virtual machine, let's say you create a virtual machine and it's running a version of Windows, you need to occasionally get into it and install updates just like you would in any other Windows machine. Remember, it is a completely separate operating system from your main computer, and it's not going to install updates. When you install updates on your regular computer, you're not updating the operating system that's running in the virtual machine. So you need to do that occasionally. And Windows, of course, will pretty much nag you to do that. So it's likely if you only use that virtual machine maybe once a week, then every few times you start it up, it's going to nag you that you've got updates to install. Um, Memory. We talked about memory, and I pretty much told you everything you need to know. When you're running a virtual machine, Not when it's just sitting on your computer and not doing anything, or it's when you actually run the virtual machine. When you click that start button to start up the virtual machine, it actually grabs this chunk of memory away from your main computer. So, for example, if I had created three virtual machines and they each ask for 10 gigabytes of RAM. And on my real computer, I only have 16 gigabytes of RAM. I'm not going to be able to run all three of them at the same time because I just don't have enough RAM for that. So this is one of the few places with Windows they actually have to know how much memory you've got. And there's some notes on that down there. You can read about that if you want to. I just think this is interesting, just a little history. Most people, I run into many, many people, probably 80% of the people I talk to have no idea that this exists, but it's not new. Microsoft VirtualBox has been around since 2007, so it's coming up on 20 years old. VMware and the player in some form has been around since 2008. And there's an older product which I used for a long time called Virtual PC, which was a Microsoft product during most of its life. And it came about in 2003. So it was actually today it would be older than 2 decades. Microsoft discontinued it because VirtualBox and VMware had it beat, kept adding new features, and Microsoft wasn't adding new features to VirtualBox. But it was pretty good while it existed. So this stuff has been around for a long time, and virtualization goes back into the 1990s and even before. So it's not new, it's just people haven't heard about it. There's some links where you can download all of the stuff that we've talked about. And again, Judy will send out a copy of the slides. So you'll have these links. And if you have any questions after the presentation, there's my email address. I'm always happy to answer questions. And what questions do you have right now?
I have two questions about licensing. If you are creating a Mac in your virtual box, do you have to have a paid copy? Do you have, how do you get that?
I don't know. I've never done it.
Oh,
Um, but what you'll have to do, and the reason I've never done it is it's a fair amount of work and I'm just too lazy to do that. But if you go out and search the internet for articles on how to install Mac OS in a virtual machine, you'll get a million hits. And
that's.
I'm sure there's a million videos on YouTube about how to do it, and they'll walk you through the process.
And have you ever heard of Mox and the virtual machine world?
Um, I don't know. That sounds vaguely familiar. And there are other systems other than the two that I mentioned.
Got
Um,
it.
I gravitated to these two because they're free. I don't know about any of the others. I
Yeah,
like
and
free software.
Randy says it is different than, what you're doing. There is a group in Southern California that their tech person recommends that the members always use a virtual machine every single time they go out on the internet, just in case.
I have heard that, and that would be a great security boost for you. It certainly would. The only downside is every time you want to open a browser, you got to go fire up your the virtual machine in which you're doing that.
Right.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Judy, if I can have 30 seconds. Uh,
Feel
the
free.
I missed it on the slide. Snapshots. Let me tell you about that because it's perfect for what you just talked about. So, what a snapshot enables you to do, you can take a snapshot of a virtual machine. And then if you ever wind up with malware or you're browsing around on the internet and it does something to your virtual machine, you can go back to VirtualBox or VMware, either one, they both do it, and you can say, restore that snapshot. And your virtual machine is back to exactly where it was when you took that snapshot. So whatever malware you had downloaded is now completely gone. Your virtual machine is back to where it was.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Mr. Huey, you're on.
Yeah, yeah, just in addition to what you were saying, if you only want to use Windows in a virtual machine, I use the one built into Windows 11 called Windows Sandbox, and I've used it and been very happy with it.
I have two, and it's kind of a lightweight virtualization
Yeah.
system, and it's pretty good. I last I heard though, it wasn't available in Windows Home, and I don't know if that's still the case.
Yeah,
Somebody might go Google that really quickly and report back.
regular people usually don't, have pro.
That's
Thanks.
right.
Gabe, you're on.
Hi, thanks. Great presentation on virtualization basics. Virtual machines actually go further back by a couple of decades. They originated on IBM mainframes in
Yes.
the early 1970s. But my question is related to the example that you gave of trying to fit three 10 gigabyte virtual machines into a 16 gigabyte RAM. My question is, will either of the virtualizers that you talked about swap or page so that you can actually be running them and they'll be moved in and out of memory as needed? Or will it just refuse to start one if there's not enough RAM available to feed it?
Yeah, so it's the second one. So it just won't start. It'll complain that it doesn't have enough memory and it won't run. So the operating system itself can do paging. So if you've got a virtual machine running Windows, it'll run in 4 gigabytes. It just won't run well because it'll have to do a lot of paging. But if you say this virtual machine is going to use 4 gigabytes of RAM, you have to actually be able to give it 4 gigabytes of physical RAM.
Sure, that makes perfect sense for lots of reasons, including that you'd be doing double paging
Yeah,
if you were allowing that to happen. You'd have the virtual machine paging and you'd have the host machine paging, and you might get same day service, but not much better than that. Again, thanks for the talk.
thanks, Gabe. And yeah, you're exactly right.
That's
Jerry
another reason
Pro.
why Judy wants her 32 gigs of RAM.
Well, and funny you say that, John, because I just bought a new computer about, I don't know, 9 months ago or whatever, and I got 32 gigabytes of RAM. And the reason I wanted that was exactly so I'd be able to run virtual machines without crowding my main machine.
Very good. Jerry, your turn.
Thank you. I've been a VMware user for 20 years. I was aware of the other products, but I use VMware. It was wonderful when VMware still owned it, but I have to tell you, Broadcom bought VMware and they have really changed the perimeter of the fence. I mean, what you have to go through to get your free copy of Player and all that. I did it. I managed it, but I'm absolutely a fan of virtual machines. I've got, Windows XP, like you said. I've got DOS 6, running that I play with, and Linux Mint and all that. I run Linux in virtual machines. I won't follow my machine, my actual base machine with, I'm sorry, I'm gigging, John. Yeah, there he goes. With Linux. Actually, Linux is wonderful. I just don't want to make it my main operating system until Windows is gone. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm babbling, Judy. But so that's
That's
what I
okay.
wanted to say.
Where's Windows
VMware,
going to be
this
gone?
this capability is absolutely one of the most useful things. Like I said, I've been using it for 20 years. So anyway,
Well, it
thanks.
would be fun to go back in the day when Mark showed us the DOS and the 3.1. That took me back to when, my son was on one side of the screen with I set him up over there. I was on the other side, never the twain should meet. And his was very sparse, his apps that he could do. And I had a ton of stuff. It was great. Anyway, Drew King, you're on.
Hello, everybody. Um, in the chat to Judy, because the global chat is gone, I sent Judy a copy of the instructions from Broadcom on how to download VMware Workstation Pro. It is a pain. That's why I got these instructions here. You have to create a free login account to Broadcom before you can't just go to the download link. You have to create an account first and then go to the download link.
Okay.
And so the pro version is free. The player has been discontinued. That's gone now. They give
Really?
everybody the pro version. Um, and that's about it.
Isn't
Thanks for
it
that. I'll have to put in an update that about
right?
Pro. I did, or player. I did not know that.
Isn't
Yeah, I
it
didn't either.
sad
Thanks.
when
Thank you,
that
dude.
happens with something that a ton and a half of people use and love? Somebody buys it and thinks they know better, and everybody gets pissed. Andy Kerrigan.
Hi, thanks. Good presentation. Two quick questions for you. Suggestions or the best way to take an up and running existing Windows 10 and turn it into a virtual machine. Is that a VMware or is that a VirtualBox or create a backup? What are suggestions on that? And the other question is, since the VM is, VirtualBox is cross-platform, can you create a virtual machine, Windows, Linux, or whatever, and then use it regardless of what the host is? So if you have multiple hosts or a dual boot machine, can you use the same existing guest on both? Thank you.
Yes. So this is cool. So let me answer. So two questions there. Um, if you had a real machine running Linux, or I'm sorry, running an operating system, anything, how would you get it into a virtual machine if you wanted to? The only thing I can think of to do is to use a program such as Macrium Reflect or Acronis or one of those guys to make an image of the real machine and then go into the virtual machine and restore that image with the same software into the virtual machine. I, I think that would work. I think you could get away with that. I may need to try that. I think it would work. The thing I think would happen though is if Microsoft Office was one of the things in that virtual machine, it would probably realize that it wasn't where it used to be and it would deactivate your copy of Windows. I'm sorry, your copy of Office. Um, and by the way, if you install if you install Windows in a virtual machine, it's going to want to be activated, but you can run it unactivated. A lot of people do. They install Windows on on an old machine and they run it unactivated permanently. So that works just fine. So especially if you're just using it to play around with, you don't need to bother to buy an activation key and activate it. Um, and the other question was,
Same VM, but from different
oh,
hosts.
so one of the things you can do in VirtualBox is you can pick a virtual machine and you can say, I've forgotten the exact, let me get the exact wording here. Is it export? Well, I can't find it and I don't want to make you wait for it, but there's a menu item someplace to export it as an appliance. And what you get is, I think, an OCA file. I'm not sure, but you get one file that's got everything in it. It's got a copy of the virtual machine's hard drive. It's got a copy of um, all the settings, the operating system, your files, everything is in that one file. And you can load that on an empty virtual machine and just say, install this appliance, and it will look identical to the virtual machine that you got it from.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
I was thinking the same thing. Very cool.
Yeah.
Murray, you're on. Unmute, kiddo.
Yeah, I just did. Anyway, you clarified the part of my question that is to do with Windows, and that is you just run it unactivated. Now, supposing you have a Mac computer. Now, I know you said you haven't really done this, but maybe you know something about the licensing arrangement. That would be the other potential thing. If you went to try to run the Mac OS on a say a Windows machine,
or Linux machine, uh, Mac OS also wants to have an activation key. Is that how is that going to work, or do you know?
I have not tried it, I'll be honest with you, but um, I I know there are tutorials out there to get it to run, and my suspicion is that they are not. One of the steps in the process is not send Apple $150.
Yeah.
So, um, and I've heard there's a version of the operating system that's called Hackintosh. And I think what they've done is created an ISO that's been hacked so that it'll run in a virtual machine on any machine. So,
Okay.
if that's something you want to do, I should probably set aside an afternoon
Well, I
and
probably wouldn't because my main problem is even with quite a bit of memory, because of the large video stuff and AI stuff that I do on the computer, I'm always short of RAM and CPU resources. So running a virtual machine is really cuts into the productivity of my regular stuff. So it's I've done it a little bit, but it just I need all that memory that I can get.
yeah, no, I totally get it. This is definitely a great tool for people that have got a little bit of spare memory. But if you've got 8 GB, for example, you're going to really be stretching it to try to run a virtual machine. Uh, Anything other than MS-DOS, you're going to have a hard time getting it to run very well.
That 64 gigs of RAM isn't looking so bad, Murray, when
It is not.
we
Yeah,
can
Linux
afford
might
it.
be
I
okay.
honestly wish I had gotten that. And when I mentioned it, they were horrified because they thought I might be a gamer, this 1,000-year-old lady standing there. I said, no, I was just asking the question, but I really wish I had gotten it. Ron, it's your turn.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. First of all, thank you, Yui and Mark. I have a question from Mark. If the host machine is connected to peripherals, like for my example would be a scanner and a printer, does the guest operating system have access to that?
Yeah, so there's when you're running a virtual machine, there's actually a menu bar that appears above the virtual machine, which is VirtualBox. And on that menu, one of the things you can do is enable or disable access to specific devices. So that's where you could plug in a USB flash drive, for example, and then tell VirtualBox, I want this virtual machine to have access to that flash drive, or I want it to have access to my CD drive. It normally would not.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You
Yeah.
bet.
Mark, does it still have the issue at time that you have to remember that if you give the virtual machine access to the thumb drive, then the host machine doesn't have it until you release it from the virtual machine, then the host can get it back?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Now,
Joel.
I
Sorry.
did have a problem with my virtual machine accessing my scanner because it was set up through the network and not plugged into my host. So it wouldn't see it. The host saw it easily, but the virtual machine couldn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Joel.
Yeah. The idea if you have an operating system already running on your hard drive, trying to get that into a virtual machine may or may not work. Part of the problem is the virtual machine looks like a totally different machine, which means it may look like it has different hardware. In particular, the monitor may not look like the same monitor because it's being emulated by your operating system to look like a monitor. And if there are different drivers required and the operating system you're trying to run doesn't automatically install new drivers as you're booting it, that may not work. So, the safest thing to assume is that you may have to install the operating system in the virtual machine. Now, if you have it already running under a VirtualBox, you may be able to offload it and run it on a totally different hardware under VirtualBox. But again, possibly if you're trying to get to some devices that it doesn't have drivers for, you might have an issue.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And every time I've ever created a virtual machine, I install the operating system from scratch. But a really good thing to do is export it as an appliance so that you can create as many more identical virtual machines. And that's what large companies do. And there's also a function in VirtualBox to clone a virtual machine. So if you've got one that's running just the way you want it, and you just want a second copy of it, maybe you want to try some different stuff out and you don't want to take a chance of messing up your regular virtual machine. There's a clone function where it'll just make another copy of it, and you can go do whatever you want to that copy, and then delete it when you're done with it if you want.
Cool. Any other questions? Gone. Hey, 2 absolutely fantastic presentations. And you guys don't know, setting these up, I fly by the seat of my pants. I get turned down so many times when I ask people to give presentations, and Huey said, of course, and Mark never turns me down, even if it's a last minute one. And he has put a bunch of new ones together that we will be having the opportunity to see. But like I said, literally, I'm flying by the seat of my pants, and I have since May of 2020. And it all seems to turn out okay. But still, I haven't gotten to the point where, gosh, gee, we only have one presentation because everybody else told me no. So over to you, Mr. Kennedy. This was so much fun.
Oh, yeah. And I really appreciate our presenters taking their time. I got a couple things about virtualization that I forgot. And I don't remember, since I have to do other things, whether Mark said anything about once in a while, some computers, the BIOS virtualization was turned off when you got it. So you might have to go into your BIOS to make sure virtualization is turned on, and maybe solve a problem later on, wondering why something doesn't work. So thank you so much, Mark. And of course, Huey, we look forward to version 3 coming up. And any other time that we have Mark back, as you know, he's an excellent presenter, and we'll do that. We will not be back next week because it's a 5th Wednesday, and that's a holiday for APCUG's Wednesday workshops. And then August is our month for a Saturday safari. So that means 1 Wednesday workshop and 1 Saturday safari, and no Linux workshop because of being on a weekend. It kind of messes things up in our schedule. So we look forward to seeing you all back in July. Enjoy your extra week off, and then watch your email for future workshops. And we look forward to you presenting for us one of these times.
Yep. Thank you very much for attending, everybody.